All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Agroecology podcast. This is your home of organic conversations. I'm your host, the Organic Guy. This is where we get to have conversation around how we can make our food system more sustainable. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Claire Nasike, who is an agroecologist, as well as the founder of the Hummingbird Foundation. Claire, thank you very much for joining me in the podcast.
Thank you very much, Brian, for having me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about, and I hope during this conversation we'll at least touch a little bit about some of the issues. And I think we'll be putting our head in the sand if we didn't talk about what's happening in Kenya right now. Young Kenyans have decided to go to the streets because they think the government is not really working for them per se. And they're calling themselves tribeless, partyless, leaderless for the last few weeks, close to a month now. So what has been your observation so far?
I think what I've observed with the protests in the country is that young people are asking for accountability from the government. They're basically asking for a Kenya that they can live in. They do not want to go to live in different countries or work in different countries. They want a Kenya that is livable for them, where they can actually go to school, work, get affordable and proper medical care. That's basically what they're asking for, and what has been made unattainable by the government of Kenya at the moment. Because if you look at the cost of education right now, it's extremely expensive, and young people are realizing that in the next couple of years we're going to have probably our younger siblings uneducated, so the illiteracy levels is going to go up. We will have no access to proper medical care, and that's why young people are like, we don't want this, we would like this to work for us. So they're basically asking for things to work for them, and the government to make sure that the taxes we pay as young people, because some of us are also working and we are contributing to building our country. Yeah? So the taxes that we pay, we want to see them put into good use, because what has happened is that there's been a lot of pilferage of resources, public resources, by the political class. And young people are saying, we want our country to work for us, which is a very commendable thing, because we're not saying we don't like the president. No, we're saying we want the president to work for us. So we want him to provide what we need as young people, that we can continue living in Kenya and building our country. Yeah. So I think it's a very bold step, and I would encourage it, and for young people to actually stand up for themselves and to question the political class, because remember, the political class are representatives of the people, and the young people at the moment, they are like, we make up 70% of the country, actually more than 70% of the country. So we are the majority in this country, and we're asking the government to make the systems work for us in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that's like a pivotal point, because as I mentioned, like they are not necessarily guided by a party, right? Or just a tribe. So it's just the young Kenyans who have come together and said, you know what, I think we can make a difference in the Kenya we want to see. And I think this gives activists a lot more hope in terms of what they've been doing for a couple of years. Would you call yourself an activist?
I think we are all activists when we are advocating for the right thing. And I think right now, there's been a joke that baddies are out in the streets, so we are all activists when you're fighting for the right thing. So all the young people right now are fighting for what is right, what is rightfully theirs as young people of this country. And any country in the world is built by young people. So we are asking for what needs to work for us in our country. We're asking for accountability from the government on the resources that it has. These resources have been, given to the government by the people. And the government needs to make sure that these resources works for the people. And one thing that I really like is that we're tribeless, we're partyless, and we're leaderless. The reason I like that is that for the longest time, politics in Kenya or protests in Kenya have been branded, to be from a certain tribe. Like we've been playing party politics for a long time, and we know the detriment of that. And I really like the fact that right now young people are saying we are partyless, so we don't associate with any party. What we are standing up for is what works for us as young people, and then we're also tribeless. We know the politics of tribe in Kenya. Since Mzee Jomo Kenyatta's time. So we've seen the impact of the politics of tribe in Kenya. And I like that we're putting aside tribe, but we are moving towards issue-based politics, because we want education to work for us. We want healthcare to work for us. We want to have employment. We want agriculture to work for us. And I think a lot of young people, especially those who come from farming communities, have been really upset at the fact that some of their parents were sold fake fertilizers. So we're talking about issue-based politics, and this issue-based politics is driven by young people, and the current leadership we have right now does not know how to deal with that, because they're used to any opposition having a face, having a tribe, and having a leader. But we don't have that. All of us are actually standing in unison and saying, this is not working for us. We want to live in our country. You've lived abroad, I know, and it's not as easy as being at home. Like, I dread at the thought of having to live abroad, because it's not as home. So we're asking the government that we want to live at home, we want to excel at home, and we want to build our country here. We don't want to, send remittances here. No, we don't want that. We want everything here to work for us, and that's what we're fighting for.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this has sparked a lot of encouragement for other youths across Africa, right? We've seen other youths from, let's say, Uganda or Nigeria sort of trying to create similar things that we're creating here. So I think from that perspective, we're creating something bigger than us in the African continent, which has been for a long time been put in a certain perspective that I think in the long term we'll get over it. So let's go back to I always say that to really understand someone, you have to go back to their early childhood. So I'm intrigued to get to know a little bit about your background. So take me to your early childhood. So maybe primary school. Who are you in terms of your personality? Are you the bully, or are you getting bullied? So what's happening in that space?
I wouldn't say I'm the bully or the bullied, but... So Claire Nasike grew up, was born in Nairobi, so born and partly raised in Nairobi and Budalangi. In terms of academics, I schooled in the western part of Kenya, and then came back to Nairobi. So I'm a mix of both. Yeah.
So Budalangi, I think I used to hear it on the radio.
Please, we are not known for floods. No.
Okay.
Budalangi is amazing. Budalangi, some of the rice sold in Kenya is grown in Budalangi. I'm sure you guys just know of Mwea alone. We have the Bunyala irrigation scheme, so we're known for something. So it's just not floods. And then plus Budalangi has given Kenya some brilliant scholars. So Professor Callistus Juma came from Budalangi. So
I've always known Babu Namwamba to be from Budalangi.
He's from Budalangi, but I wouldn't put him in the same league as Professor Callistus Juma. And then we've had some historians as well from Budalangi who've written about Kenyan history, like the late Dr. John Osogo as well. So we've had some brilliant scholars, of course.
Okay. So I understand your grandmother played like a critical role of who you've become so far. So can you take us through that? I mean, what impact did she have in your life?
My grandparents, they're late now, but both my grandfather and my grandmother had a huge impact in my life. My grandmother was a herbalist, and so she knew a lot of trees, their uses and all that. I got to witness her in action. Like, it was interesting to watch growing up, because I was very young then. I must have been, I think, 8 or 10. So it was interesting to watch her take a deep dive into her work. it was also fun at the same time, So she was a herbalist and a midwife. So, pregnant women used to come to a compound, and I'm like, oh, Lord. Yeah, but I got to learn a lot from that. Various plants, their uses. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I got into this field that I'm in right now. And aside from that, we also had a farm. And I would accompany my grandparents to the farm. Don't ask me if I used to dig, but I'm the kind that would show up and then I'm ready to go back home. Yeah, but it was very interesting watching them farm as well. They never used pesticides on their farm. They grew different kinds of crops on their farm, and it was very good to watch. There's no single day that we didn't have food, and we didn't buy that food. It was from the garden, from the farm, everything. Like my grandmother had a kitchen garden in the compound, and then we had now a farm outside of home, which was very, very good, at least for me. And it gave me an understanding of what life is about. And that's why I advocate for smallholder farmers the way I do, because I have an understanding from a very young age of the importance of farming, the importance of trees. People just see trees and they're like, yeah, this is just a tree. But for me, I look at it beyond. It's just beautifying the environment, providing shade, etc. But I look at it from the lens of what's the value of this tree in terms of, like in the environment, sequestering carbon, of course, controlling erosion, but then also medicinal value. What is the value of this tree? So my grandmother and my grandfather played a pivotal role in my life.
Yeah, that's interesting to see. That's like real life demonstration of transferred knowledge per se, in terms of your grandmother showing you all the trees and what they're used for. So I think that's something also our generation need to actively involve our kids in. So unless, I think that knowledge is going to disappear very, very fast. So you mentioned there, so I'm assuming your grandmother was a small scale, right? And the majority of where our food comes from is from small scale farmers, right? I think up to 70-80% of the food we consume. So why do you think, I think if you look at from a policy perspective from our government, they don't get a lot of assistance from the government. Why do you think is that the case, and how can we rectify that?
I think when it comes to smallholder farmers, the policies implemented by the government are not pro small scale farmers. Sadly, when you look at the Kenyan government, I think it's part of the Malabo Declaration, and it's required by that declaration that 10% of our budget is dedicated towards agriculture. But if you evaluate our budget, it has never actually gotten to 10%. So money aside or resources aside, the policies as well are not favorable for the small scale farmers, because when you look at agriculture has the highest employment multiplier effect. By that I mean, if I'm able to grow food, health, hospitals can actually have food, so I'm contributing to healthcare. Transport industry, I'm also contributing to that, because the food needs to move from one place to another. Aside from that, there's also manufacturing. The food needs to be processed. So there's various ways in which agriculture contributes to the growth of an economy. And our government has not been very much focused on agriculture, because if they increase the budget towards agriculture, then various sectors of our country would actually be thriving at the moment. And policies now, we have various policies that don't support small-scale farmers, because what small-scale farmers are actually asking for is, we need agricultural extension services, We need somebody, agricultural officers, to come and check our farms. What's going on? How can I decrease soil erosion on my farm? How can I improve crop diversity on my farm? How can I conserve water on my farm? But we don't have that. What we've seen in the recent times is that the agricultural extension officers that go to visit small-scale farmers are those ones who work with agrovets. So they're pushing a certain product. They're pushing either seeds or fertilizers. So when they come on the farm, they already have an agenda. And the agenda is that I want you farmers to use this particular product that I'm selling you, be it a pesticide or a fertilizer or the certified seeds. So smallholder farmers want more agricultural extension services. That's one. And then two, they also want inputs that work for them. I mean, it's been in the news, the scandal on fertilizer, fake fertilizers, fake seeds. So farmers, I've interacted with farmers and worked with them for a couple of years now. And fake seeds is not a thing. It's not a recent thing. It has been happening. And farmers are saying that the seeds they're using now, they're buying from the agrovet shops. Some of them fail to germinate. But the seeds they use, their own seeds, the ones they save after harvesting, those ones they're germinating.
Yeah.
But the government is not taking any action on this. So farmers are getting fake seeds, fake fertilizers, and the government is not acting on this. Yet, 80% of the food produced in our country comes from small-scale farmers. Some farmers have no access to water. It's a matter of government saying, okay, we are going to make sure that farmers from this region, for example, the semi-arid and arid regions, making sure that these farmers have access to water. Right now, our agriculture is rainfall dependent, which is not a very good place to be in as a country, and looking at the vagaries of climate change. So is our government investing more in that? We saw what happened at Galana Kulalu, billions of Kenya shillings were actually sunk in Galana Kulalu.
Project,
So nothing came out of it. So our government doesn't really value agriculture as much as I saw like the current government was campaigning on, hustler and all that, the hustler narrative. They're going to lift the mama mbogas, but the mama mbogas also need that mboga. For them to sell that mboga, it has to come from the farmers.
Yeah.
So if the farmers are not growing food, the mama mbogas are not in business, sadly.
Yeah. I think when you talk about like the hustlers or the bottom-up model that the current government politic about during the campaign season, from the look of things, it was like small-scale farmers heavy, because the small-scale farmers are the hustlers, right?
Yeah.
They are the ones who do anything for them to grow their own food. So, I mean, from the wording or from the marketing that they did was pretty good in terms of catching the hearts and souls of those people. But at the end of the day, they have better or higher interests that they need to serve, sadly, from that perspective. So when I introduced you as an agroecologist, right? So, and it's fair to say agroecology has been in the news of late in terms of it has more momentum and a lot of people are talking more about it. So can you help us understand like what is agroecology?
Thanks for that. I think agroecology, I'll use very simple terms.
Okay.
Agro and ecology. So agroecology is about growing food in line with nature, like the natural principles. So for example, you're not using pesticides on your farm because you like for different kinds of animals to thrive, or microorganisms to thrive on the farm. You're conserving water, you're using seeds that are climate resilient, for example, or they are acclimatized with the weather patterns of your area. So agroecology is just farming in a way that is in line with nature. So you're not harming the environment in the process of growing food.
Yeah, and why do you think there has been, a lot of interest into agroecology and a lot of people having, wanting to be involved with agroecology? What do you think is the reason behind it? We see a lot of NGOs also promoting farmers to adopt agroecology.
I think agroecology has been there for a while now, and I think since time immemorial, just that maybe the farmers didn't have the term for it, but agroecology has been there. I spoke of, when I started, I spoke of my grandparents, right? And they used to grow food, and they were intercropping. For as long as I remember, our farm had millet, sorghum, cowpeas, pumpkin leaves. For as long as I remember, there was no single time where our farm only had like maize. No, there was no single time. So agroecology has been there. Maybe the term is what the farmers did not have, because it's a purely scientific term. But I think agroecology is more like addressing the needs of the small scale farmers, and that's why a lot of organizations are actually embracing it and adopting it, and recommending it to other farmers, for example, who are involved in conventional agriculture. But agroecology focuses on the use of locally available resources. So if farmers want to use indigenous seeds, agroecology promotes the use of indigenous or locally relevant seeds. Agroecology promotes the use of locally available resources, like manure, compost, all that. Conservation of water, agroforestry. There are trees that are actually very essential in farming that provide a lot of mulch, or can be used to control pests and diseases. So agroecology does that. That's why we actually recommend it to farmers, and that we see a lot of the land is actually dwindling, and this is agricultural land, and for various reasons. So of course there's urbanization, and we see like in areas like Nairobi or like Kiambu, we've seen Kiambu is a very fertile area. But we've seen a lot of, buildings coming up and all that. So that means that the agricultural land is actually reducing. And so we need to make use of what we have. And that's why we're recommending agroecology, because, it promotes diversity. So crop diversity. Yeah. On a small piece of land, you can be able to actually grow a lot of food. So we're recommending that based off of the importance or the value that agroecology brings, as opposed to like industrial agriculture that is heavily focused on monocultures.
So it also catches more of the people who farm. Like small scale farmers are not going to afford the alternative in terms of using chemicals and stuff. And I think that's one of the things that I personally also like about agroecology. In terms of using chemicals, right? So agroecology tries as much as possible not to encourage farmers using those toxic chemicals. So let's talk a little bit about the chemicals that are being used in our farming system, right? So we've seen a lot of examples. So farmers from central Kenya who grow vegetables, or farmers from the Rift Valley who grow tea and coffee. We have seen stories in our publications in The Nation, in The Standard, and about the effect of these chemicals, right? So why do you think there is a push, rather, for these farmers to adopt the use of these chemicals from our government agencies, especially from our extension officers and stuff?
I think for me it's about and cells, especially from the multinational companies behind the agrochemicals. Because if you look at the statistics, only 5% of the pesticide cells are in Africa. And you see the population of young Africans. And we say 80% of the food grown in Africa is by smallholder farmers, right? So the cells, there's room for the multinational companies to actually make more money in Africa. Hence the focus on promoting the use of those toxic pesticides in Africa. So if you look at the statistics, some of the companies, top companies, the top companies producing those chemicals and the seeds are pushing this in Africa, but it is not for the benefit of Africans. They're in it for their own gains. And the sad thing is that some of these pesticides that they push on the African people, they push in Kenya, are extremely toxic. My master's thesis was on pesticides. So I speak from a point of authority when I talk about pesticides. 76% of the pesticides that we are using in Kenya today are highly hazardous pesticides. And this was from research done by the Root to Food Foundation and I think Heinrich Boll Stiftung. And it's a pity that we have 76% of the pesticides used in Kenya as highly hazardous. A layman might ask, what do we mean by highly hazardous pesticides? But these are pesticides that have extreme effects on the environment and the human body. So we're talking about short-term and long-term effects. But we have bodies in Kenya that are responsible for monitoring these pesticides, but somehow these pesticides are still sold. And this is not about politics. This is about our environment. This is about the Kenyan people. And I think, was it in 2021 or so, researchers from the University of Nairobi or Kenyatta University, one of the two universities, I can't recall clearly. They did a research and found that some of the male children, was it in Murang'a? Yeah, they were being born with defects on their male reproductive systems. And one of the reasons was that the mothers, the pregnant women, were actually exposed to pesticides. Yeah. And that's just one of the effects. Those are one that was done. We have several others where pesticides have been found in our sukuma wiki, in our tomatoes. We've seen that in the media. It has been in the mainstream media, in our water. You and I are scientists. We've seen probably publications on the level of pesticide residues in our water. And so when we're speaking about these toxic pesticides, we're looking at the long-term effects. What are the long-term effects of these pesticides on our environment? And people assume that, I'm going to spray on my farm and then after 2 to 3 weeks, it will be gone. No, there's the residual effect. That's what remains, what's the remnant. So there's some of these pesticides that actually remain in the soil. And that's what we are worried about. And if it remains in the soil, it's likely to be, depending on its properties, chemical properties, and also environmental factors, like rain, such like, it's likely to be washed into the rivers, leached into the rivers. And we're depending on that for water, right?
Yeah. Those are the water that they use to feed the cows.
The water that feeds the cows, the water that we use for agriculture, and some of those water, the water ends up, for example, in the dams, and then it's pumped, and it comes onto our taps.
Yeah.
So it's a cause for concern. That we're not just saying that we don't want this because we're politicizing it, but we're looking at what are the impacts, what are the short-term and long-term impacts of these chemical pesticides on the average Kenyan. And I think only 1 out of 6 farmers in Kenya use protective gear when using these pesticides. So imagine we have 76% of the pesticides as highly hazardous. That means they can cause cancer, they can affect the nervous system, they can affect the reproductive system, but only 1 out of 6 farmers are actually protected. So we're looking at a hazard here and at a disaster, and this doesn't end with the farmers. It also trickles down to consumers, because when you're eating this food, it has the pesticide residues. So you're consuming the residues. Remember, you cannot wash pesticides off a vegetable or off a tomato. No, you can't. And that's one thing that people think they can do that. I'm just going to buy it and then I'll wash it, but you definitely cannot do that.
Yeah, I mean, their skins are very sensitive, right? So if you spray it, let's say a tomato is going to absorb some of those chemicals.
Of course.
And even if you wash, you're not going to get it off, right?
No.
Same thing with vegetables.
Yeah.
So I think when you really you start studying and looking at how this affects you, you just kind of get scared, right? But I think the good thing is that we are now having alternative, right? So we have organic alternatives that farmers can use that are safer, right, and can be able to control the pests or the diseases that are affecting their farm. So I think from a bright perspective, that's a good form of change.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from a policy perspective, yes, we have these institutions, but what use is it if they can't actually implement on their mandate, right, on what they're supposed to do in terms of safeguarding farmers themselves using these chemicals, and also in the end consumers also in terms of being able to consume these chemicals. So I think when we look at a system kind of thinking, then we will be able to move in a better direction from that perspective. So moving ahead, and similar to that topic, back in 2022, I think the government decided that it was time they allowed the importation of GMOs into the country. At that time, we had approach at least from the public, but one of my worst things was when our trade CS at that time said, there's a lot of things that kill Kenyans, and this will be just one of them.
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, first of all, could you help us understand what is a GMO?
GMO is a very heated topic. And before I even give the definition of what GMO is, I think I am not against technology. I think I just need to say that clear.
Yeah.
I'm not against technology. And you can advocate for technology, but still value the sovereignty of the people. And for me, the problem I have with GMO is the erosion of the sovereignty of the people, especially when it comes to food and seed. So GMOs are basically genetically modified organisms whose composition is not natural. So they have been engineered in the laboratory. So they're completely not natural. You're taking, let's say, the genetic material of a soil organism or a soil bacteria, and you're mixing that with the genetic material of, let's say, a maize variety. And that is not natural. Like in natural circumstances, the two would never pollinate. So in simple terms, that's what GMO is. And I think there's also a lot of confusion between a hybrid. So a hybrid is from the same species, for example. So if you have two maize varieties, right, and one of them can be able to withstand dry conditions, and the other one produces a high yield. So you could say, I want to have a maize variety that can be able to withstand drought, but also give me high yields.
Yeah.
So then you crossbreed the two varieties, but both of them are maize.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. So you're getting a slightly stronger version of the initial two varieties that you had. So that's the difference between a GMO and hybrid.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I think I've been complaining from a lot of Kenyans is the impact that these GMOs will have for us as consumers and also for the farmers, right? So, for example, the other day I saw a post by one of our governors from CIA, who's very, let's say, enthusiastic about introducing GMO cotton to farmers on his counties, right? So, Kenya is not the first country to allow GMOs to be grown in their country, right? So what have you seen from the continent as well in terms of the countries that have adopted GMOs? Is there something to smile about?
Not at all. I wouldn't say there's anything good about GMOs because one, GMOs take away our sovereignty as a people, and especially small-scale farmers. GMO is about influencing or controlling what we eat. So somebody somewhere is sitting in a laboratory and designing or coming up with a maize variety and telling Africans that, I want you to consume this kind of maize variety. So what happens to us as a people? Like, do we have a choice to make in terms of, no, I don't want to eat this, or I would like to consume this? What about the foods that we've always consumed since time immemorial? So it's all about control. Like somebody wants to control us and tell us, this is what we want to eat. This is what we want you to eat. The second reason why I am not for GMOs is about patents. So whoever controls the seed owns it.
Yeah.
And eventually, if that seed gets to us, they also control us. So GMO patents, I've seen across the world where farmers have been sued. Like in the United States, farmers were sued for growing the Monsanto Roundup Ready soybean.
Yeah.
They were sued. I think they had to pay around $23 million.
It was a cross-pollinated.
Yes.
Yeah.
In I think Brazil as well, farmers have been sued. We saw in India as well, farmers were sued by, was it PepsiCo? Lay's, the potato chips, Lay's. But they later on withdrew the case from the farmers. And you know why they were suing them? Because some of these farmers, like the case in the US, these farmers saved these seeds from the Monsanto Ready Roundup soybean. So they saved the seeds. And when it comes to the case in India that was withdrawn, was that these farmers were being sued for growing these potatoes. Like cross-pollination happens.
Yeah.
So these potatoes ended up on these farmers' farms.
Yeah.
They didn't grow them willingly. Like cross-pollination happens, which is something beyond their control.
Yeah.
That is natural. That's a natural process.
Yeah.
So they were being sued for these potatoes growing on their farm.
Which should actually be the opposite.
We should actually be the opposite. They should be suing because there is an erosion of their genetic diversity on the farm.
Yeah.
They should be suing this particular company, but they were being sued. So try to imagine that in Kenya, do we have any proper legal or redress mechanisms for small scale farmers for when their crops let's say like the indigenous crops or local crops are contaminated by the GM varieties. I see government pushing for GM. I think right now we have BT maize, right? See government pushing for BT maize. I see BT cotton. But do we have the proper redress mechanisms? Or are farmers going to be arrested in the next couple of years? We have the National Biosafety Authority, right? It's actually mandated by under the UN Cartagena Protocol. So it's actually the government corporation or agency that is mandated, with GMOs, like, making sure that whatever GM crops are introduced are safe, they have no harm to the environment, the people, But for us here, there's no research. Like if we say, why has BT maize been introduced? But have we done any research on it to actually show that it would contaminate other crops?
Yeah.
They're telling you they'll do the research after 20 years, once this crop has actually been introduced. So after 20 years, what is the damage that would have been done in terms of genetic diversity of the local crops? So we're not talking about that. And then we're also not talking about the health effects. Like, has research been done on the health impacts of some of these GM crops? And somebody who will watch this podcast will say, there's been a lot of science and, scientific research, on GMOs being safe for consumption. But is that scientific research independent of influence from the proponents of GMO crops?
Yeah.
So there's so many issues around GMO, but for me, my biggest one is the erosion of sovereignty, food and seed sovereignty, especially for Africans. Like, as Africans, we need to be able to decide what we eat. And I'm not saying technology is bad. If that technology is coming in to help us advance our seed and food sovereignty as a continent, and let's say to the level of Kenya, like as a country, then it's very much welcome. If you're teaching farmers how to process their indigenous foods and package them for sale, and you're developing technology for that, that's very much welcome. But a technology that is actually coming to control our food system, that is not something that we need to accept as a country.
Yeah. And I think if only our leaders could sort of take this like a systems approach, or view it from different angles before really hopping into this trend. And the other thing that I think they don't talk to us about is part of the reasons why they accepted GMOs is because of the trade deal that they have with the United States, right? Part of that deal says that Kenyan government has to accept GMOs that are coming from the United States into Kenya, right? So if you look at it from that perspective, then it makes sense why the government will be so intent to allow such products into this market. So there are self-interests that are being looked after more than the interest of us as Kenyans from that perspective. So if you look at from that perspective, then it makes sense why the government is so
Of course.
in introducing the GMOs.
Yeah, that's right. This is not about Kenyans, actually.
Yeah.
This is not about Kenyans, but this is about political interests. And who has the upper hand in this? Of course, the United States has the upper hand in this.
Yeah.
I think they were among one of the largest growers of GM crops.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for a market for their crops. And Kenya is that available market. If they can get into Kenya, they can get into the East African region, So we are just creating a market for them at the detriment of our farmers. Think about it. We have GMO maize in the market. Farmers from Trans Nzoia, will they be able to grow maize anymore? No, they won't be able to grow maize because there's an overflow of maize in the market, GM maize in the market. So we are kicking farmers out of work.
Yeah.
And most of the people in this country have gone to school because of proceeds from farming.
Exactly, yeah.
So we are seeing that we are cutting this livelihood, and then we want to embrace imports. So what happens to the current state of food in our country? I don't like talking about food security, but I prefer to talk about food sovereignty. What happens to us as our ability to, determine what kind of foods we want to eat? What happens to that? That's already eroded because we've allowed the United States, we're trading with them. But of course, in the trade, the United States has an upper hand over us.
Yeah.
The farmers in their countries are heavily subsidized. When you look at us, and then they're large scale farmers.
Yes.
When you look at the farming here, it's small scale.
Yeah.
So we cannot compare with that. We cannot compare with that. Our farmers are going to be kicked out of farming. And when they are kicked out of farming, fertile agricultural lands are going to be idle. And we know when land is idle, that's when the multinational corporations kick in the form of what are they called? Pharma corporates, So they come in, and then the land is suddenly available, and then the land disappears, and then we have no land in our own country because a certain corporate from the United States, or I don't know from where, has leased the land for 99 years. I mean, look at the case of Del Monte. I've been to that region, And when you sit down with a community around there, when you sit down with a community, like let's say in Kericho and in the avocado growing areas, when you sit down with those people, you get to hear some of their concerns because they've not had access to their land. They can't even pass through that land. If they do, they are whipped, they are arrested for trespassing on our land. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous when you think about it holistically.
Yeah, and I think those are the issues that we need to address. And thank God you are, doing something about it. And something that I also like about your post is you talk a lot about our indigenous foods, right? One of my favorite posts from you is on our local foods, right? You post about millets, for example. Our amaranth, you're cooking them, you're showing them on social media. So what's also the inspiration behind that? Is it just to push back on what the multinationals are doing? Is just passion of yours?
I think it's a passion of mine, and I picked that also from my grandmother. My grandmother used to eat very healthy, extremely healthy, same as my grandfather. The millets were part of our diets. Sorghum, the pumpkin, pumpkin leaves, kunde, all that. So everything I show is something that things I've grown up with, things I've learned from my grandmother how to make. And it's something that I wish other people can also learn. Some people may not have been as fortunate as I was, like growing up with like living with your grandparents and learning from them is something I see as a blessing. And I thought I may use my space to educate people on the same. And one of the things that really pushed me, aside from learning from my grandmother, one of the things that also pushed me to start speaking about indigenous foods and showing people how to cook them and consume them was the increase in the number of fast food outlets in our country. Yeah. In Nairobi, when you go to a mall, all the restaurants, at least 90% of them are fast food outlets. And what does that mean? We're looking at rising cases of lifestyle diseases, obesity, diabetes, and so forth, And I thought these people are giving our generation their food. How about us also showing our food? This is what, as Kenyans, as Africans, this is our food, and it's cool. And there's also been this notion that, when you eat millet, like brown ugali, you're poor, Yeah. There's been that narrative. And what I'm trying to do with just advocating for indigenous foods is actually to show that these foods are healthy. This is what we used to eat. This is what our forefathers used to eat. And like our grandparents lived up to 90, Like my great-grandmother lived until she was 118 years old. Wow. I know. I saw my great-grandmother.
That's close to a record, right?
I know. And that was way back in 2005. So... And what she used to eat, like she had like smoked beef, she would, because we're close to like Victoria, like fresh fish. I think she also liked liver and vegetables a lot. So I'm thinking, how about if we go back to our food, but because the culinary skills have been lost, how about teaching people how to use this? Because when everybody hears of, millet and sorghum, they immediately just think brown ugali and porridge. So nobody is thinking that I can actually make yummy pancakes out of millet. For example, finger millet. That I can actually make chapati out of millet. Or I can actually make like a very healthy snack out of sorghum. Or I can replace sorghum with rice. Like in my household, I barely eat rice unless necessary. I've learned ways of like cooking sorghum as a replacement of rice.
Yeah.
So teaching people how to consume these foods and the importance of these foods, because I'm thinking of our younger generation. Like 70% of Kenyans are actually below 35 years.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, we're here consuming junk food. Our food is grown with pesticides. How about we start changing the narrative? These are the indigenous foods. We have the amaranth, the mrenda. We have the pumpkin leaves and all that. How about we teach the young generation how to cook it, not just fries? Because every time you see like cooking videos on Instagram, for example, it's all about somebody making potatoes, and potatoes are not indigenous to Kenya, and neither are they indigenous to Africa. So we need to learn how to cook our traditional foods. Look at India, and I think I draw inspiration also from the Indian cuisine. They use a lot of millets, they use a lot of sorghum, they use a lot of amaranth, and it's interesting how they actually cook it.
Yeah.
And so we can actually cook our foods like that. It's just that we've gotten used, our palates have gotten used to highly processed foods that have no nutrients. And when we eat foods that are actually rich in nutrients, we feel like they're not food. And that's why like people from Nairobi, or other urban areas, when they travel to the rural villages, they're like, oh, these vegetables taste actually yummy. They taste different.
Yeah.
Because that's how vegetables are supposed to taste. Whatever you eat in Nairobi is contaminated.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's meant for that, right? It's grown. Let's say it's sprayed today by 3 p.m. and the next day is getting shipped to Nairobi. So
of course,
definitely your taste is going to be a concoction of
course,
those chemicals, and won't be the right taste that you like to have from your vegetables. So it's very interesting. Is there like your favorite meal that you like to share, like that is indigenous?
My favorite meal that I like to share. Oh wow, I have many, so it's difficult to pinpoint on one. But my favorite is, we call it in Luya muhenye.
Muhenye, okay.
Yeah, so muhenye is like sweet potatoes mashed with the beans. Yeah, so they're mashed together. I like to make it with ghee, so mashed together, and then you can have a curry on the side, like chicken curry or beef curry. That's my favorite, like the Kenyan chicken, not the broilers. Yeah, I like that. Something else that I also like, I like brown ugali very much, very much.
Yeah,
the people close to me know that. I really love. I love brown ugali from millet and sorghum. I love brown ugali. My favorite vegetables are pumpkin leaves. Pumpkin leaves and nderema. Nderema is the Malabar spinach. Yeah, I love that combi.
Smooth
it actually looks like this.
Yeah,
look almost similar to this. Yeah, so nderema, and then of course I eat meat.
Yeah.
So chicken, fish, any day, anytime.
Okay.
Yeah, and the fresh fish, not the deep fried one.
Oof, okay. Yeah, I always go for the deep fried one. Maybe it's time I try that one as well.
You should try the fresh one. I think the fresh one has more taste. And maybe because I've grown up, I'm a daughter of the lake. So because I've grown up close to the lake, I got used to the taste, but it's very yummy. So once you get used to it, and once you cook it in a really nice way, it comes out very tasty.
Okay. Yeah. That's pretty good. Nowadays, it's literally impossible to talk about agriculture and food, and especially since we've just talked about indigenous foods, right? We have to talk about climate change. It's even nowadays, I think we have a ministry that is maybe a department that is dedicated to climate change. And sometimes some people believe in it, some don't. But I think one thing we can agree on, personally, I see in terms of the solutions that are being offered, don't kind of make sense. And one of those solutions is carbon farming or carbon trading. So I'm not sure if you come across such a solutions yet.
I think I have. I even wrote an article, I think, was it last year, about carbon markets.
What is
because it was being fronted very much during the Africa Climate Summit that we had last year in Kenya. I think for me, carbon markets, I don't see them as a solution to climate change. Someone else might be of a different opinion. Of course, divergent opinions are always welcome. But carbon markets for me is a way of, the proponents of them exploiting communities. Exploiting communities and having access to our resources and land, to be specific. Because when you look at carbon markets, they're talking of, planting trees, in Kenya, and then a company that is based somewhere in the US or somewhere in Europe, pays for those trees in the form of reducing their carbon footprints.
Yeah.
And that money never reaches the communities. I mean, we've seen scandals with Vera, We've seen scandals with the Kasigao project. I think is it in Savo, that region around there. We've seen scandals with that. We've also seen. I've been in conversations with farmers where they spoke of some of these projects, like the carbon projects, that have not benefited them. Like the money has been disbursed, but the farmers have not seen that money. But yet here they are planting trees and all that, and hoping that they can get that money. So to me, carbon credits it's a fallacy. I'd like to call it wash. It's like we're just making some quick money, but how that money is being utilized, we really don't know.
Yeah.
When it comes to climate change, I think smallholder farmers have a critical role to play on that. First of all, our weather patterns are varying. That's just the reality. The rainfall patterns have changed. Before then, we used to know between March and May we have the long rains, but sometimes it gets to March and there's no sight of rain. And September and I think September all the way till November, the short rains. Yeah. But sometimes that changes too. So I think smallholder farmers have a bigger role to play in this. First of all, because they work with the soil. And soil is one of the largest sequesters of carbon. Yeah. And so investing in small-scale farmers not only makes sure that we have food as a country, but then we are also limiting our emissions, And specifically when it comes to also the use of chemical fertilizers. Chemical fertilizers are from fossil fuels, the nitrogen fertilizers. So we are limiting our emissions. So if we are working with small-scale farmers, let's say to produce food in an agroecological way, let's say, they're not using chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, and so forth. And they're also incorporating trees on their farms. Then we are helping these farmers, sort of adapt to the changing, climatic conditions. And I think also the use of indigenous seeds that are acclimatized to their local, climatic patterns. So that also helps with the small-scale farmers. And that's why I think they have a bigger role to play when it comes to climate change and their adaptation to it, and which is why I always front solutions that are actually workable. Like I actually saw during the climate summit last year that, the President Ruto was actually, using an electric car. It was a very tiny car.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You and I are Africans, and we know what happens to powerful people in government. So I saw him moving around with that small vehicle, and they're saying, the way electric vehicles are the future, they're going to help. Yeah. They're going to help when it comes to mitigation or reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions, right?
Yeah.
But how long did that last?
For the photo shoot, I guess.
Yeah. Immediately the summit was over, he went back to his guzzlers, the fuel guzzlers. Yeah. So for me, some of the solutions that are actually fronted, I see them as the things done to tick boxes, like carbon markets, the electric vehicles. Those are things that I see as, ways of just ticking boxes, like, okay, let's do this. This is a solution, let's do this. But it's not properly thought out. One thing that I would advocate for, like when it comes to emission of like fossil fuels, for example, aside from agriculture, working with farmers to reduce their usage of chemical fertilizers and the pesticides, and the use of local resources like the seeds on farm, and also reduction of the transport, like food transport, food mileage. Yeah. Like if you go to a supermarket today, we have coconut oil from Thailand. And you're asking yourself, just Kilifi, down at the coast. Yeah. You mean we can't produce coconuts that can be able to give us coconut oil? Do we have to import, coconut oil all the way from Thailand? So I think having processing facilities in our country, drying facilities in our countries, that then enables farmer to process food. So that also mitigates or reduces, emissions. The other thing I see is in regards to transport again. Yeah. So transport, meaning when you look at our roads, you schooled in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
I've been to Netherlands, and there's an option for you to cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In our African society, we used to cycle or walk, right?
Yes.
But right now, the way our roads are constructed, there's no room for us to walk. We don't even have a proper railway transport.
Yeah.
I mean, if we are looking at reducing our emissions as a country, there are some of the practical things that we can do. And for me, those tiny electric cars that the president was riding in, for me, it's a fallacy.
Yeah.
We have the real solutions that we need to do. We have to plant trees, reforest our forests, And we're not reforesting them by evicting communities. We're actually working with the communities to do this. And we're not taking care of our forests so that some company based in the UAE can actually come and buy carbon credits. So we're not doing that. We're doing it for our communities. We're doing it for us. This is something that works for us as a country.
Yeah.
So for me, when it comes to climate change, I like to be realistic. What can work? And coming from an agricultural background, what can work for the small-scale farmers? What can work for the communities? That's how I look at climate change and any adaptation measures that is related to that.
Yeah, and I think that's the correct way to look at it. I mean, how can it benefit us as Kenyans, right? That has to be like the front of our discussions.
And let me just add something before you continue. I think we've had flooding in Kenya, right? And then we see our president in a small car. We've had flooding in Kenya, a small electric car. He's saying, Kenya is moving towards, emissions, reducing our emissions. We've had flooding in Kenya, which is beyond the norm that, we're used to, yeah?
Yeah.
But we don't have infrastructure. Yet we have a disaster management unit.
Yes.
And this disaster management unit is supposed to make sure that we have infrastructure that cushions Kenyans against the impacts of extreme weather events like floods, like drought. We've seen
have a budget, huh?
They have a budget. There's money, actually taxpayers' money.
Exactly.
They have a budget.
Yeah.
So you're wondering, why can't we put in place the infrastructure first? We keep talking about food insecurity. This is a phenomenon that has been happening. Drought has been happening. I think since I was born, I've been hearing about droughts and, But why can't we use some of this money to put in place infrastructure that will reduce the risk of communities to this effects?
Yeah.
Why are we not doing that? But we are quick to go for this UN event, and I'm not castigating the UN events and all those things. I'm not against them.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying
But
is, can we have feasible solutions to this? Like a solution that a community deep down in a rural area in Nairobi, in Kenya, will actually relate to it. Yeah. Because if you tell a community, a rural community, we have carbon markets, they're looking at you like, first of all, what is carbon markets? Or we have electric cars, they're like, electric cars. Those electric cars, somebody will... we don't even have electricity, We don't have electricity. So you're telling us about electric cars. What do you mean? Or someone can actually start to scrutinize the electric cars and say, the electric cars, where is that electricity coming from? Is it from fossil fuels?
Yeah.
So how is this a cleaner version of the cars that we actually have? So for me, I'm not against any of the technologies, but let the technologies we propose when it comes to climate adaptation and mitigation be relevant and feasible for the local communities.
Yeah.
Let us just not write down solutions and think, this is gonna work for community in Kenya or in Uganda. No one size fits all. Like the context is different. So let us approach climate change in that manner. This is what can work for the Kenyan communities in terms of adapting to climate change. Let us make sure that they have the infrastructure, they have the resources they need to be able to adapt to this.
And I think that's one of our challenges. How can we make our small-scale farmers as a South be more important than the interest of those guys who are pushing those kind of projects to us, right?
Yeah.
And just riding on that momentum, I think the Kenyan public right now is very much aware of what their government is doing, and I think that have been evident in a couple of points now. One of the things when you talk from an agricultural perspective that has been very relevant, and a lot of people are talking about it, is the Seed and Plant Varieties Act that has been going around. And I know you've been on top of this issue, so can you help us, explain to us, we are 2 years old, what does it mean and what is it all about?
I like that. Explain like you're 2 years old. I like that.
Yeah.
So the Seed and Plant Varieties Act, CAP 326, I think we started looking at this. I used to work for Greenpeace back then. And so when I started working I was the project lead for that campaign on Seed is Sovereign. So the main aim of this campaign at that particular time was just to show how sovereign seed is. And to show that, we needed to start looking at the existing laws in Kenya. So we did a bit of research. I think Greenpeace with other partners as well. We did a bit of research. And I think one of the partners was Seed Savers Network. So we did a bit of research and landed on the Seed and Plant Varieties Act, CAP 326 of 2012. And this law makes it illegal for farmers to share or sell. I'll define sell later, but it makes it illegal for farmers to sell uncertified seeds. And then it also makes it illegal for farmers to be found selling these seeds if they are unregistered as seed merchants. So meaning that a farmer cannot sell seeds that have not gone through the certification process as required by the Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service, that's KEPHIS. So as a farmer, in simple terms now, as a farmer, you need to take the seeds from your farm to be tested and certified by KEPHIS. And KEPHIS, I think also the inspectors have to come to your farm. Once they've done that, of course, there's a fee you pay, and I think maybe about 200,000 or so. So there's a fee you pay, and then once you pay that fee, you are certified. The seed is certified. That's one. So that's on selling the uncertified seed. So your seed has to be certified. So that seed you harvest, like the extra harvest you get from your farm, and then you take it to the market. Because our grandmothers, our mothers take that to the market, yeah? That one is uncertified seeds. So as per this law, if you're found selling it, you're committing an offense.
Yeah.
The second thing, you need to be registered as a seed merchant. So that means if I, as Claire Nasike, want to sell seeds, I have to be registered by KEPHIS. I think there's a KEPHIS Act. I don't know if it's of 2012. The dates escape me, but there's an act. So I have to be registered as a seed merchant. Seed merchant meaning I can sell the seeds, my seed that has been certified. So I am registered as a seed merchant. So if I'm not registered as a seed merchant, and if I'm selling uncertified seeds, then I'm committing an offense as per this law. And that means that I can be arrested and jailed for 2 years, or pay a fine of 1 million Kenya shillings as a smallholder farmer in Kenya. So in simple terms, that's what this particular law says. So this law, I think, in my opinion, it infringes on the rights of farmers.
Yeah.
To sell and share and exchange seeds, because this law defines the sale of seeds, of those uncertified seeds, as either exchange or barter. Barter trade. Think about it.
Yeah.
In the village, if I come to your farm and I've seen you have a bean variety that I really love,
Yeah.
I will ask you, Brian, can I please have this variety? And I'll take it to my farm. Or I'll tell you, give me the seeds, and then I'll give you the other ones. That's barter trade, yeah? Or they sell it at the market, at the local market. So you take your surplus and take it to the local market. You find like a kg of seeds going for 100 bob or 50 shillings, So they are selling it.
Yeah.
So in a way, this law makes it illegal for that to happen. And it's a huge, huge problem, because it's prioritizing the rights of plant breeders. Who are able to pay this, the certification fees. They're able to register themselves as seed merchants. By looking at a small scale farmer, even 20,000, it's a lot of money for them. They're thinking, okay, will I invest in the next planting season, or will I register myself as a seed merchant.
Yeah.
And then their rights to save these seeds. This is a cultural process.
Yes.
This is something our grandmothers inherited from their grandmothers, great-great-grandmothers, like that. You cannot prohibit that. And I also see it as, aside from, like somebody stealing our culture, they are also stealing our resources. I like to call it biopiracy.
Yeah.
They're stealing our resources. Because think about it, you're going to register this seed as yours, right? You've registered it. I'm the one planting it. It's mine. So everyone who uses it has to pay royalties to you.
Yeah.
But the original germplasm, where did you get it from?
Nature.
From nature.
Yeah.
So how are you selling something that is freely given? Freely given to you? How are you doing that? It makes no sense. I mean, it's logic. Like, you cannot sell that. And farmers have bred some of the seeds since time immemorial. They have shared the seeds. They have exchanged them. They have preserved them. So how do we have a law in a country where 80 to 70% of the seeds we use in Kenya are actually from farmers? Only 20% of the seeds we use are certified. And then remember this, 80% of the food we eat is produced by small-scale farmers. So these small-scale farmers are actually using seeds on their farms. So how are we prioritizing the interest of the 20% of the seeds over 80%? How are we doing that?
Shouldn't be.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And that's why we're saying this law is not advocating for farmers' rights in Kenya. And for a country that at least 70% of its population lives in the rural areas and are engaged in agricultural activities, this law needs to be amended so that farmers can actually be able to, share their seeds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I mean, if you look from that perspective as well, it's this, like, indigenous seeds are very well adapted to these local conditions, right? So if you are sort of telling these farmers who are basically from the same geographical area, who have these seeds, who have really adapted, we're talking about climate change, have adapted to this location, so you are disadvantaging them to an extent. Of
course you are. Of course you are. And you're making it difficult for them to actually access the seeds.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, indigenous seeds are actually largely uncharacterized. They're not certified.
Yeah.
They're not packed in, in sachets and all that. No.
Yeah.
They're just open. They're there. You want some seeds? Okay, have some. They're there. And these are seeds that these farmers know. If I plant this particular variety, I'm going to have a harvest. Based off of our weather conditions here, or our climatic conditions, if I plant this, I'm going to have a harvest. Think about it. In the Ukambani area, which is like semi-arid and arid, right?
Yeah.
They have the pigeon peas. They call them zoo. When they plant zoo, they are sure they are going to have a harvest because zoo is a very hardy crop. It's drought resistant. They're going to have crops. They're going to have food on their plate. So then how do you come and tell somebody that, this zoo of yours is uncertified, and so you're committing an offense by sharing it? It makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
And I remember a while ago, I was interacting with farmers from Ukambani, and some of them told me that when a girl is getting married, they give them seeds in a gourd to symbolize the continuation of life and nourishment of her family. So she's given the seeds by her grandmother or any elderly female who is around at the time. So they give them the seeds in a gourd, like, you can go and continue taking care of your family or nourish your family. Yeah. So are we losing our culture? Are we taking away, or not losing, but eroding our culture?
Yeah.
Are we also taking away the right to be able to, feed ourselves, the right to be able to determine what kind of foods we want to grow?
Yeah.
And then are we allowing multinational corporations to actually steal our resources? Because, like I've said, it's theft.
Yeah.
It's theft of natural resources.
Exactly.
When you look at the seed industry, I was looking at the statistics the other day, and it's actually projected to grow to $48.8 billion in 2027. Make the
Lot of
conversion
money.
in Kenya shillings.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
So, and at the heart of this seed industry,
Yeah.
I think about 10 global companies who are involved in the sale of seeds. So they are looking at profits already. And how do they make profits? Through policies and laws such
Yeah.
as the Seed and Plant Varieties Act.
Exactly.
So, work with governments, make it illegal for small-scale farmers to share or sell or exchange seeds. And then now they have to buy the certified seeds, and then make it punitive such that they're arrested. So no one else will dare do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that, the small-scale farmers push the cells. So that's their main aim.
Yeah.
And I think as a country and as young people who are well-read in this area, we should not allow this. We should make sure that our government knows that we know that this is wrong.
Yeah.
We know that this is not going to benefit our communities. We know that this is not going to benefit our farmers.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't allow multinational companies to actually control our seed. That's theft. They shouldn't come and say, we have these certified seeds and you guys need to use this. No. Let us use the seeds we as Kenyans know, like Kenyan smallholder farmers know and are well conversant with. We know this seed grows here, it needs this amount of water. Let's embrace that. Let's continue to push for that. And what we are asking the government is to value small-scale farmers.
Exactly, yeah.
We saw during COVID times, I think that was during President Uhuru's time.
Yeah.
And the food we were eating at that time was not imported. It was local food. Yeah.
Okay.
It is the local producers who actually fed Kenyans during COVID time.
Okay.
Countries-
so we have a blueprint.
Yes, countries had closed their borders.
Yeah.
There was no importation and exportation happening, right? And so our farmers were actually feeding us. If they did so during such a critical time, they can certainly feed us during, the climate crisis.
Exactly.
So why are we trying to limit their ability to feed us by introducing punitive laws? We need to actually encourage farmers, to venture. Like us young people, we need to be encouraged to venture into agriculture.
Yeah.
And to be told, okay, you want indigenous seeds? You can get indigenous seeds from this particular community bank and supported by the government.
Yeah.
We don't want I'm not saying that community banks supported by NGOs are bad. Sometimes the funding runs out.
Yeah.
And if the funding runs out, the community banks can close, So there's the question of sustainability of that community bank. But because you pay taxes to the government, if government has a community bank or several community banks, we are guaranteed of its sustainability. If the Ministry of Agriculture today says, okay, we're going to set up in all the 47 counties, agriculture is a devolved function, right?
Yeah.
At the county level. So the Ministry of Agriculture is telling the counties, make sure that in all the counties, all the 47 counties, we have community seed banks. Any farmer who is interested in getting seeds, they can pick from the seed bank. At the end of their harvesting period, they return the seeds to the seed bank.
Yeah.
That would be a model that works.
sustainable.
And we would have actually gotten rid of the issue of fake seeds. Because farmers know that is where I source the seeds from. So if this seed doesn't germinate, I'll go back to that seed bank. But here you've already purchased the seed. You've used a lot of money, purchased the seeds, it failed to germinate. Will you walk into that agrovet to claim your money back?
No.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we want laws that work for small scale farmers. That's what we are advocating for. We're not against the government as young people who are advocating for a change in this law. We're not against the government, but we are advocating for small scale farmers because we know the impact they have to our country's food situation.
Yeah.
If the farmers are not producing food, Kenyans will not have food. And that's why we are asking for a lot of young people, to support. When we speak about punitive laws, ask us, what are they? What do they mean? And translate them to your parents, great-grandparents, and let them know what this means. Because it definitely concerns them.
Yeah, and it's something we saw during the finance bill, right? A lot of young people actually stepped up and helped translate the bill to the local language. And you were part of that as well.
Yes, I was.
Yeah,
I thought it's critical. I mean, because most of these laws and bills, they are in English. And I'm not saying that our parents are illiterate, but sometimes they understand best in our native languages. And that's why we normally have budgets for civic education, right? That's why it's important. So it's important for us to actually let them know, this is what this bill says. This is how it's going to affect you. So we need to make it relatable, because sometimes just say, oh, the finance bill, oh, the seed law. But how does it affect them? That's what they don't understand. And which is where us guys come in. You know, we were taken to school for that.
Yeah.
So to help our country, to build our country. And that's one way of building our country.
Exactly. Yeah. And as you said, I mean, our young people are now educated, like they can read and they can see what's happening within their government. And I think moving forward, that has to be part and parcel of what we do in terms of keeping our government more accountable to us, who they're supposed to serve, right?
Yep.
And since you are on top of these issues, especially on bills and laws that are being passed, especially in the agricultural space, are there some laws that we should be looking for? Because there has been a lot of murmur. So we had a lot of talk about government banning use of manure at some time. We had the issue with potatoes. We had the issue with bees. That if you're not,
I think there's also the livestock bill.
So are there bills that are in the government right now that we should be aware of?
Okay, I think just for clarity purposes, the manure one, it was a proposed amendment in the Food Crops Act, I think of 2013, but that never saw the light of day.
Okay.
So farmers can use manure, in farming. The livestock one, I think also it caused a lot of uproar online, and I don't think it went through. The one that concerns me the most, and it's actually a strategy, the agricultural sector transformation strategy of 2019 till 2029. The reason why it concerns me the most, and why it should also concern other young people probably in agriculture or anyone who grows food, small scale or not, there's the issue of moving farmers out of farming into more lucrative jobs. That's how this strategy defines agricultural transformation happening in Kenya, and Kenyans consuming more processed foods.
Interesting.
That's how this strategy defines transformation. Like if we see more Kenyans eating more processed food, that's now transformation.
Okay.
And then there's also the aspect of land. So they're saying one of the biggest inhibitions to agricultural transformation is that the land in Kenya is communally owned. So for us to be able to transform agriculture in the way we want to, we have to make the land privately owned. What does that mean? Like relate that to kicking farmers out of farming, and then now land should not be communally owned, but privately owned, and then Kenyans consuming more processed foods. This was actually listed down. If you check the agricultural sector transformation strategy, 2019-2029, you will see that. It's actually there, laid bare.
Crazy, yeah.
And it's insane. And this is what should be concerning people, that this is a strategy for agricultural transformation in our country. And it wants to do that. And then there's also the aspect of input, increasing access to input. I'm not saying farmers should not have access to input. They should, but the right kind of input. We don't want farmers having access to chemical fertilizers. And these fertilizers are actually harming the soil. We've seen rising cases of soils that are very acidic in nature because of the continued use of chemical fertilizers. So do we want to expose our farmers to that? And relate that to what is happening with the fertilizer scandal. Because, we're saying, we need to give our farmers subsidized fertilizers. There's an avenue for corruption there.
Exactly.
Because everyone is like, we're providing subsidized fertilizers, but they are actually stealing. So farmers are not having access to this, but that is also in the strategy. Like farmers need to have access to fertilizers. There's also the farmers being registered for them to access these inputs. Like I for sure get messages from the NCPB. I'm always addressed like some Gideon guy. Like they didn't even get my name right. They addressed me as some Gideon guy. Please come and collect your fertilizer. I'm like, you've got my details wrong, first of all. So what are the chances that other farmers are actually not getting access to these fertilizers? So that's one of the policies, or I would call it a strategy. The other one that really, really concerns me, aside, of course, from the Seed and Plant Varieties Act, there's also the Agricultural Soil Conservation and Management, I think, policy. It was passed last year in 2023. And it's very much focused on soil conservation and reducing, soil erosion and all that. And one of the key things that stood out for me in that particular policy was that the policy was says that for us to conserve the soil or to reduce soil erosion, we have to move the land from being communally owned to privately owned. So then we can enforce the soil conservation measures and all that. Does that ring a bell with the strategy? Yeah, the other strategy.
Yeah, okay.
There's a pattern. Yeah, you can see the pattern. Yeah. So I'm wondering, what is so difficult about working with agricultural extension officers to train farmers on their lands on soil conservation methods?
Yeah.
What's so difficult about that? Why do we have to transfer land ownership to privately owned for us to be able to implement measures such as soil conservation? We have a lot of young Kenyans who are agronomists, agroecologists, agricultural scientists. Why not pull those young Kenyans into the agricultural jobs for those who like to be, agricultural extension officers?
Yeah.
Why not pull them in there so that they can actually support farmers?
Yeah.
Why change the land ownership? And this is not something I'm making up. I've actually gone through those policies.
Yeah.
And whenever I read them, I'm like, oh, wow. So they're coming for our land. This for me seems like, recolonization.
Yeah.
But through land, which was the same as the first colonization Kenya had. It was through land. Like if you look at our Kenyan highlands, most of our fertile land is gone.
Yeah.
We're talking about food insecurity. Nobody talks about the fertile lands. Nobody talks about tea being grown on our fertile lands. And I'm not saying growing tea is bad, because, it creates revenue.
Yeah, it's a cash crop,
It's a cash crop, creates revenue for Kenya.
Yeah.
But as a country that speaks of its population not having access to food, but having our fertile lands under cash crops or under concrete buildings. Are we serious when we say we want to address this? And I know somebody will say, food insecurity is about, having access to the physical food or the resources to buy the food, which is okay. But what is the safety of this food?
Yeah.
That brings in the aspect of food safety. You have the money to buy the food, right? We've seen cases of our sugar being contaminated with mercury.
Yeah.
So how safe is that food? So are we better off growing our own food where we know how we've grown it, or buying food as buying imported food that we don't know how safe it is?
So yeah, I think those are very pertinent issues that I think we need to ask, and it goes back to our leaders actually making an effort to try and work for us rather than the multinational corporations that have their own interests at heart in the long term, right?
Yep.
So they're not doing all this for free, right? For our best interest.
No.
They're trying to expand their market, as you mentioned, from the seeds. They're looking at there's a large number of farmers who don't access our seeds, so how can expand that? Chemicals, the same thing. So I think we need to look at that from, okay, what's in it for themselves rather than for us. So I think looking in the long term, that's something that us as youths, we have time because we are still young and we are knowledgeable. So that's something that we need to push for moving forward. So as we close here, I want to, we've talked about a lot of things, and we are all about how can we make our farming systems more sustainable. So I want to hear your perspective on this. So having talked about all these issues, what do you think we need to do as a country or us as Kenyans, right, to make our food system more sustainable?
I think the first thing we need to do is to invest in our agricultural sector. We already know agriculture has the highest employment multiplier effect, right? We need to at least make sure that 10% of our budget, and this is something we need to hold any presidential candidate to, We need to hold them accountable to that. Like at least 10% of our national budget is allocated to agriculture. This is the only way we can grow agriculture. And having 10% of our national budget allocated to agriculture allows for various investments. First of all, water. Our agriculture is heavily dependent on rainfall. So if we can invest in water sources, dams, etc., then we can make sure that, farmers can actually grow food all year round. That's the first thing. The second thing would be processing facilities. So we need to make sure that food does not go bad. We've seen cases of tomatoes, being fed to cows and cabbages in Nyandarua,
Yeah.
If we had proper value addition systems, then this would actually work for small scale farmers. Then they would not be undergoing that loss, like they've grown, they've grown food, they've invested in this, and now they have no market, The other thing that we also need to invest in, there are a couple of them. Sorry.
Yeah.
The other thing we need to invest in is also our infrastructure. So transport, drying facilities. We've had cases of, maize being infested by, what is it called? I forget the name.
Okay.
There's I'll remember later on. So we've had cases of that maize, being contaminated. So do we have proper drying facilities in our country for that? So we need to do that. Aflatoxin.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. So we need to actually have proper drying facilities. Aside from that, also road network. Can the food grown in, let's say, Nyandarua, move to Marakwet? Can that food move to like the northeastern region
Kisumu,
with ease?
Mombasa, yeah.
Can it move there with ease? We need to work on our infrastructure. The other thing is also the issue of inputs. We need to make sure that farmers have access to quality inputs. Quality inputs that do not harm the environment and harm people. And here someone will give me will raise the question of Sri Lanka and all that, where they moved to organic agriculture and, the country collapsed and all that.
Yeah.
But I'm saying we make it a step,
Yeah.
a step-by-step process, So where farmers are actually learning of alternative ways, let's say of controlling pests on their farms and how they have access to agricultural extension officers and so forth. So if we do that, then we are also going to make sure that, these farmers are supported. Like they have access to information, they have access to the resources, they're consistently supported. And, our agricultural sector is going to grow, and so will other sectors in our country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very comprehensive and very systematic and a sustainable approach to how we can move our food system forward. So the last question I want to ask is, we've talked about a lot of things, and it can be hard, right? It can be challenging in terms of emotionally, physically, and all other aspects of your life, right? So working in this space. So what keeps you going? What motivates you to keep talking about these issues, getting involved, or educating other people about these issues? What is that thing that you can say, this is what keeps me going?
I think I've made it my purpose in life to educate other people on agriculture. I had the privilege of learning from my grandmother and from my grandfather. And like I initially mentioned, not a lot of people have had that privilege. And so for me, I made it a point that I will use my platform to educate other people, and especially young children. I'm very passionate about children, and that's why I founded the Hummingbird Foundation, of course, with support from Greenbelt Movement, where I was awarded as the third scholar. So I want to educate young people. I want to pass the knowledge that I have to young people through my organization, the Hummingbird Foundation, and in my individual capacity as well. On my social media platforms, you'll see that I share a lot of information on agriculture, indigenous foods, seed and food sovereignty, all that. I want to use my platform to educate other people. So for me, I take pride in people being more knowledgeable on agriculture than I found them. Like I want them to know that. That's what pushes me forward, because if I'm speaking alone, then I have no power, as opposed to us speaking as a group. And we have seen that with the recent protests, with the recent protests in Kenya. So that's what pushes me forward.
Yeah, and you're doing a pretty good job at it, I must say.
Thank you very much.
Your posts are very insightful, very knowledgeable in terms of what us as young Kenyans can do from getting us aware on some of the bills that are going through, or it's indigenous foods, or talking about agroecology. So I think from that perspective, you're doing an amazing job. So this is a part of the podcast where I call it the rapid fire.
Oh, okay.
So I've prepared 10 questions for you. So the idea is really to get the guys to know a little bit more about you, just in case it didn't come out through our conversation. So there are 10 questions. There's no right or answer to these questions. So just it's based on your personal things that you've gone through in life. So so it should be fun. So you ready?
Yeah, very ready.
Okay, so the first question is, what was the first career you dreamt of having as a kid?
A journalist.
Okay, so the second question, if you had to eat only one meal for the rest of your life, what will it be?
Brown ugali, kienyeji mayai, pumpkin leaves, and avocado.
Oof.
Every single day.
Okay. So the third question, when you're not working, how do you like to spend your time?
I read a lot. I dance a lot. I actually thought I would be a dancer. Yeah, but my family, Yeah. If you're watching this, uncle, you know yourself. Yeah, so I would have been a dancer. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you let someone down there. Okay. So the fourth question, what are you afraid of most?
What am I afraid of most? I don't think there's anything I'm afraid of. Back then, I used to be afraid of losing my loved ones, but that happened when I lost my grandparents. Nowadays, there's nothing I'm afraid of. Failure, success, there's nothing I'm afraid of.
Okay, that's a good perspective to have. Yeah, so the fifth question is, where is one place you like to go that you haven't been?
One place I'd like to go that I haven't been. Wow, that's a very good question. I think all the places I've wanted to go, I've been there.
Wow, lucky you. Okay.
Yeah, I've been to most of the places that I would have wanted to go. Let's see. I love the beaches. I love beaches so much. I think maybe because I grew up next to the lake. So one place, if I had to pick a place that I would like to go, that would be Mauritius.
Mauritius.
Yes.
It's a good choice. So the sixth question is, what's your favorite book?
Unbowed by the late Professor Wangari Maathai.
I think she's your mentor, right?
She's my hero.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for all the things she stood up. She stood for and she stood against. She's my hero. I think we wouldn't have Karura Forest today. And for me, my undergraduate school fees was paid for by the Greenbelt movement, So she's been, posthumously, she's impacted my life. When I got the scholarship, she'd already died. So posthumously, she's impacted my life. So it would make sense that her book is one of my favorites.
Yeah. So the seventh question, okay, maybe you've mentioned this, but if you could invite 3 people, dead or alive, to a party, who would they be?
Dead and alive to a party.
Yeah.
Of course, my great parents.
The 2? Yeah,
my great parents, 2 of them. Alive to a party. Oh, my cousin Sarah. Okay. She's the life of the party. Those 3, they would make the party very interesting.
Okay, so the 8th question, what was something you've done that made you extremely happy?
Starting the Hummingbird Foundation. I think I'm living one of my life's purpose, and I'm really grateful for that. I get to work with school children to set up food gardens, and these are children from, the marginalized areas within urban areas. And I'm really happy that I started the Hummingbird Foundation and I can work with these children. I can teach them about agroecology, guide them about consumption of food, healthy living, indigenous foods. I'm really happy about that I'm creating a small group of hummingbirds, like the late Professor Wangari Maathai used to say.
Yeah, that's also a pretty good name.
Yeah.
That goes with the mission that you're dedicated to. Okay, so the 9th question, what quote resonates with you most?
Quote that resonates with me the most. It's the little things that we do that matter, of course, from Professor Wangari Maathai. Yeah.
Okay, the last question, knowing what you know now, what advice could you give to your 18-year-old self?
Breathe. It's never the end of the world. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that was it. Those are 10 questions. Thank you very much for being open and sharing your knowledge and insights that you've had throughout this period. So I think it's going to be insightful.
Thank you very much, Brian, for having me on this podcast.
Yeah. So till the next time, remember to be organic.